Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and back from an 8-week hiatus thanks to COVID-19. This is 21 this week. Coming up next, 63% of Marylanders think Governor Hogan's restrictions have been just about right. Montgomery County is the only jurisdiction in Maryland that doesn't have a plan to reopen. Why not? And Maryland primary elections are scheduled for June 2nd. Stay tuned. Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by education activist Cynthia Rubenstein, Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, Maryland Young Republican National Committeeman Evan Young, and political strategist Susan Heltemes. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Ever since the coronavirus first arrived on our shores from Wuhan, China, there's been a national debate as to the threat that the disease posed to the American public. The initial projections were very dire, with as many as 2 million American deaths from the disease. Now, 90 days later, as the country re-enters the first phase of reopenings, the death toll nationwide is just over 100,000, and here in Maryland, the number of COVID-related deaths has been limited to 2,270, which is less than 0.1% per capita. Mark, early on, Governor Hogan called for the state to shelter in place, and there's been much criticism of the governor for his one-size-fit-all approach, considering that the majority of COVID cases were isolated in 5 counties. But 63% of Marylanders approve of his approach. What do you think?
Well, I think he has gotten it right. I think it's useful to remember why we're doing this, which is to remember the phrase, bend the curve. So what we've been able to do is stop the disease from doubling what was essentially every 4 or 5 days, which would have, at this point, completely overwhelmed our hospitals and other healthcare resources. That part has been accomplished. And so we're really now in a position to make changes and open up more. And the governor has accommodated the interests of different jurisdictions by allowing for variation to take place from county to county.
Susan, do you find it interesting that at this stage, there are more Democrats than Republicans that are approving of the governor's lockdown actions?
Well, it's 82% of Dems and 72% of Republicans. I think that maybe the tone at the top of the White House is affecting some thinking, but he keeps saying, I'm following the science. And that's what I think we need to do. He talked about also he wanted, a process set up of tracing, which it's pretty much in place now. And he also, I'm really pleased with, he's saying for those counties that are in a different shape, which Montgomery County is, pretty bad, that they need to go slower, and that's the way to go. I mean, in this county, we have 535 deaths. And it's still spreading to, so I think he's doing a great job. Are there things he could have done better? Yes. He could have tested prisons and nursing homes sooner. But beyond that, I give him kudos.
It's actually 572 as of today. But the fact is that relative to our population here in Montgomery County, which is over 1 million people, that's less than 0.5%.
I don't want to get into an argument about the value of a life.
Arguing about the value of life. What I'm trying to put into perspective is the relative risks that that Americans have and that Marylanders have from this disease, and it's been way grossly overstated.
But it is very deadly for seniors, for Blacks, and for Latinos, and we have that population. And, I think there is something to be said, and countries in Europe that did the best were ones that leveled the curve and they're wearing masks. And even though we're at this point, the governor is stating. You got to still wear the mask and do social distancing.
Well,
And we may disagree on that, Casey.
Hey, Casey, I think what we're hearing is the crux of the debate that's changed. So 2 months ago, we were talking about bending the curve to keep from overwhelming the healthcare resources. Now we're hearing a change, which is to say that what we're doing is to prevent all COVID cases, which is candidly just simply not a realistic expectation.
Well, in Montgomery County, the numbers of people on ventilators and ICU beds is just now going down in the last couple of days, and those are two important factors.
Let me jump in here. I want to echo what Mark said. Early on, this was flatten the curve, meaning the same number of people will eventually get sick from this, but we spread it out over a longer time so we're not overwhelming the hospitals. Now, for some people, that's turned into everyone stay home and shut down the economy until anything that can hurt you is gone. There's no guarantee that there's ever a vaccine for this. Some people have been saying keep, non-essential businesses closed until there's a vaccine. There's no guarantee that happens. A second wave comes along, the virus could be mutated. That vaccine that might exist might not be effective then. So I think we're to the point where early on, the one-size-fits-all approach, I think, is how you had to go because you don't know what you're dealing with. You don't know where the hotbeds or the hot zones would be. But now we're to the point where if you are in that vulnerable population and you are worried about the virus, continue to do what you've been doing. Stay home. Work remotely if you're able to. If you're in populations like many of us, where 98% of the cases are mild, and if you even get it, over 99% of the time, if you're otherwise healthy, you'll get over it and you might never even know you had it. It's time for those people to be able to decide for themselves what's best. Businesses to decide if they want to take the risk of reopening. And people like myself and many people, take control of their lives and be able to decide if they want to go back to work, if they want to go shopping, if they want to go out in public.
Well, I want to shift our focus now onto our county, Montgomery County, because Governor Hogan was critical this past week of County Executive Mark Elrich for his failure to have a reopening plan for Montgomery County 9 weeks after we've started this, when all of our neighboring jurisdictions, including the District of Columbia, including Prince George's County, and Northern Virginia, have started their reopening plans and have announced them. Our county executive last night, looked like Tweedledum, saying, "Oh, I don't know, I won't have it on Friday. Maybe I'll have it by Monday." What's wrong with our county executive?
First of all, we were in the worst shape, and it's naive to announce a plan 9 weeks ago when he didn't know what he was going to be facing. However, this afternoon at 2:30, we are taping on Thursday. At 2:30 this afternoon, he is announcing his plan. And I don't think Prince George's total plan is out there also, but we're the two worst counties in the state. So he's going to do it today at 2:30, and next week you can talk about how you like the plan, but it's coming.
Here is leadership, Susan. And the fact is we've had little leadership from our county executive. He hasn't been transparent in giving us what his metrics are for opening up the county. We don't have you have to search like hell to find out the number of hospital beds that are being used and how many ICU beds are used. It's the lack of transparency and the lack of leadership. Now, Susan, I love your graph and data, but I want to switch.
This is his chart. He has a dashboard of metrics that is released every day, Casey.
No, it's released for the state. Cynthia,
Montgomery County, right here. It's released every single day. You can go to the site.
Okay, so I have to give props to Susan because Montgomery County does have a dashboard that has increasing data points that are really useful, that would be triggers for opening up more businesses and outdoor activities. This came relatively lately. This came, I believe,
It's been like 2 weeks, hasn't it now?
maybe 2 weeks. There is
2 months in.
There are two of the telling triggers, the acute beds and ICU beds have been those two triggers that haven't moved fast enough. But that's may simply be that they have to increase the number of ICU beds and the number of acute beds, because what was the criteria for deciding what that number would be? Every other indicator is moving in absolutely the right direction, and we will be opening up next week, I predict.
Could I, yeah, and I think we are in the right direction, but I'd like to point out that other jurisdictions, particularly Georgia, Florida, that have moved ahead more quickly than Maryland and certainly Montgomery County, have seen a reduction in the pace of cases. So we're able to draw on the experience of these other jurisdictions to have a sense of what the relative risk is, and it's not as great as it sometimes is portrayed. Again, people need to be cautious, they need to do social distancing, but that's something which can be accomplished and is being accomplished in other states.
Agreed.
Well, then you both have the last word, because we're now going to take this short break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the upcoming election that is being held mostly by mail. Have you gotten your mail-in ballot yet? Stay tuned. We're going to, when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. One of the more interesting effects of the coronavirus is that the Maryland primary election, scheduled for late April, has been delayed until June 2nd and will be conducted primarily by mail-in ballot, although there are 5 jurisdictions or 5 local polling places where you can go to in the county. So, Evan, this has been a real shift in the dynamics of the race. How has mandatory self-distancing and the rules against meeting in public impacted the primary elections?
Yeah, for a lot of these lesser known or smaller name or first time candidates, especially if they filed later closer to the deadline, they've had to take their campaigns completely virtual, and a lot of times they depend on those in-person meetings, door knocking, getting in front of different groups and associations. Haven't been able to do any of that, and some have been able to more successfully transition completely online unexpectedly, overnight basically, and some haven't. So I think it could be very interesting for some of those smaller candidates, the ones who were able to use technology better and quickly adapt and still as best able to connect with voters online. They could do better in this primary than they may have originally. And I think that's actually a good thing in some respect, because being able to quickly adapt and find a new path and continue on towards what they're trying to do, which is get elected and get on to November, that's good qualities to have in someone that you want in an elected position. So those who are able to adapt to these circumstances and find a new way to campaign in this time, that could actually, be good for them if they do get elected in November.
But Mark, I want to ask you, since you're with the state Republican Party, I mean, is there any way to determine how impactful these social media campaigns are for a kind of a new first-time candidate?
It's a challenge. There's a lot of activity. There are a lot of Zoom activities. There are town halls and what have you. What you don't know is whether or not you're really just reaching the faithful over and over again and not really reaching the undecided voter. And that is, that sort of remains to be seen. I suspect that, forgive me for saying this, but the Apple ballot has a huge benefit. I know they were out advertising, and that's the advantage of resources, being able to do digital ads and obviously also direct mail as well.
I do want to point out one other thing real quick. For these Republican primaries, I know Republicans, depending on the candidate or where the race is, varying levels of mistrust or concerns about the mail-in voting. But what's going to be important in these Republican primaries is who, despite any concerns they have, is best able to get their voters to turn back in those mail-in ballots. Right. That could be the difference that gets them across.
Yeah, Mark, you were shaking your head.
Well, I was going to say it's slightly off, but I would say I have been shocked by the number of ballots. We've heard reports back of people who are essentially inactive voters. I mean, they have not been voting for multiple elections and those ballots were sent out. And that is consistent with the process that the Board of Election has, which is that as long as mail is being delivered at an address, the ballot goes out. And so we had a chance to talk to Jim Shalek about this, and the practice with the Board of Elections is to continue sending mail out to voters, hold them on the list as long as mail is delivered. And so it could be at a household or at an address. It's a real, frankly, concerning thing for fraud as a result of that.
Well, it's difficult to know when people have moved, and especially if they've moved to a different jurisdiction. My daughter's mail-in ballot came to us at our house. She's moved to Virginia 2 years ago, so I guess you must have to proactively let the Board of Elections know that you've moved. But many people don't do that. But I want to turn our attention to what is probably the most hotly contested race, and this question is going to go to you, Cynthia, because you're our education guru here. The big election seems to be the election for the 3 school board members. That is particularly the at-large race, which has got 13 candidates or 14 candidates who filed. So why has this race become so important and so contentious and expensive? I understand a lot of people are dumping in money from questionable places to support this campaign.
Well, there are 3 reasons. And it's all about the at-large race with the 13 candidates vying. Those 3 reasons are the boundary study, the boundary study, and the boundary study. That is what stimulated many candidates who've never been involved before to jump into a race. There are 2 sides, basically, polarized sides. There are the pro-boundary study, and there are the anti-boundary study candidates. This race has inspired a lot of fundraising, but when we're talking about fundraising, we're talking about $20,000, $25,000. Obviously, especially in this race, endorsements that come with mail are extremely important. So that's the Apple ballot that went out in the mail. And the other thing that's important is word of mouth. This is who I'm voting for, because many, many, many voters who are interested in the school board race still don't know anything about most candidates. So the successful candidates, and 2 people will proceed from the primary and face election in November, they're going to depend upon people calling their neighbors, emailing their neighbors, sharing on social media who they support for that race. And
well, I'm surprised the neighborhood-based website Nextdoor, which is one of its policies are that it's not to be used for political purposes. I mean, that got blown out the window about 2 weeks ago when someone posted an endorsement for a candidate. And then after about 48 hours of people chastising this woman for doing it, then everybody else started putting up their own candidates and choices for the school board. So it's interesting how contentious this race has become. Now we only have about a minute and maybe 2 left. So who are the likely winners in the at-large race?
I think that on the side of the folks who support the boundary study, there are 3 candidates that are getting support. The 2 at the top are Sunil Dasgupta, and he has MCEA, the teachers union endorsement, and Lynn Harris, and she has some support from elected officials and from some student organizations. Then there's Dalvin Osario. And I won't mention the other candidates from the other side because
I'll do that for you.
You mean Stephen
disclosure
Austin?
here.
Go ahead, Mark. We
Disclosure
got about a minute. We got about a
Yeah.
minute left on this segment.
Okay,
Well, I
so
was gonna say-
full disclosure here. I am pro boundary study, and I'm also on the record in support of Sunil Dasgupta.
Well, I was going to say, the interesting thing is Steve Austin has made himself, or is become something of a lightning rod as an opponent of that. And as a result, there's been a lot of attacking of him. And it'll be interesting to observe whether or not that doesn't have a sort of reverse impact in terms of those folks who aren't happy with the study picking him out because they kind of heard about him and know about him. And the pro-boundary study people get kind of split three ways. So that we'll see what happens on that.
And I'm supporting Lynn Harris.
Well, thank you, Susan. I'm supporting someone else, but I won't say their name because it'll probably cost them votes.
They could lose, Casey.
As it usually does when I give a recommendation. We got about 15 seconds left. So, Mark, who should I vote for in the District 8 primary for Congress?
Well, I'll let you go on that. There's a couple of really great choices, and so I won't pick one there.
Oh, come on.
No.
I guess you can't. All
yes.
right. Well, I want to thank you all for this enlightening conversation about mail-in ballots. We can dissect it next week when we decide whether or not it was successful or not, whether or not even the ballots have been finished, having been counted next Thursday. Now, stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Susan Heltemes.
I am wearing a pin today that says, "Make America Kind Again." As a native Minnesotan, I am devastated at the murder of George Floyd. And I think it teaches us that police need to be taught more with de-escalation. And they say Black Lives Matter. It's not a chant anymore, and it better be a call to action, because this is the most heinous thing we've seen in a long, long time. In the interim, wear your mask, and thank you to all the essential workers.
Thank you, Susan. Evan Young, your parting shot.
So since this pandemic began, we've seen some people use it to grasp more power than they're entitled to. Other people use it to pit one side against the other. And some use it to stir up hatred and try to score political points. However, young Republicans across the country since the end of March have made over 300,000 phone calls to elderly Americans from coast to coast, checking in with them, being a friendly hello to isolated seniors, and connecting them with local health departments and resources where need be. So I'd encourage everyone to follow the lead of people much younger than you and do something productive with your time and continue to help out.
Thank you, Evan. Cynthia Rubenstein, your parting shot.
Okay, continuing in that vein, shout out to MCPS, which has served tens of thousands of meals to students and their families and provided groceries, including meals for the weekend. They also distributed more than 55,000 Chromebooks to students at home, as well as hotspots for those who need them so that they can do their schoolwork. And a shout out to the teachers who had to pivot quickly and figure out how to teach children online. So parents have gained a new appreciation for our teachers, and children and teachers have gained more appreciation for each other. So I will shout out to MCPS, the teachers, the students, and parents at this time.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Well, when this show finally appears, we'll be going down to the very bitter end of the primary. June 2nd is the date that ballots have to be mailed by. I will encourage my Democratic friends to, particularly in District 8, to consider our own Susan Heltemes, who is running for delegate, Amy Klobuchar, who's, I guess, out of the race right now, but you can still send a message. Vote for Susan if you're in the Democratic primary. If you're a Republican, you don't have much choice. I'm running as a Trump delegate.
well, Mark, that was the nicest thing you've said about Susan in a long time. On the air or off the air. And I just want you to know I did vote for you. So in the primary, I want to thank you all for being here. This is an experience that we've enjoyed today. And I look forward to getting back to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.